was a great class where we really went deep into the idea of the wings, the emotions, the 4 spiritual worlds, the 4 levels of Tyra. Fascinating questions. Hopefully you're going to love it and subscribe because you're like, oh, I like this. I want more of it. Of course, we're in that most glorious moment, which actually, I know it even doesn't seem like it, but our sages view this as like the ultimate day of the entire year. As the sages say, that we're not such good days for the Jewish people like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, Yom HaKippurim. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, well, they put the 15th of Av first. So that means it's even better. It's even bigger. It's even more significant than Yom Kippur. So it's an amazing night, special night, a great, amazing, unbelievable energy, and a perfect night to learn Tanya. Last week, we said we spent almost the entire class on one side note that was pretty Kabbalistic deep, took us a class, and we were discussing an angel that's the overarching energy of the third world of the 4 spiritual worlds, the world of Yetzirah, of formation, and explaining that angels, obviously very emotional energy, because that's the world of emotion, and the wings of that angel, the wings of love and fear, which of course were a support and added Kabbalistic depth to have been discussing for like the last 3 chapters, this idea of our service of God and the wings we attach to our service and our love and fear. Not that we're comparing our love and fear to the love and fear of the angel Metatron, but it's a parallel image. By this angel, by this massive angel of this entire world, what are his wings? Intense love and fear of God. And by our service, the wings of our service are also love and fear of God. So we're up to reading inside the body of the text, which is now going to show the enormous precision of this metaphor of the Rebbe, of the wing being love and fear. So we're right after the side note. On the top of page 110, there's a little star. Because just like, why am I saying, the author Rebbe is saying, why am I calling love and fear the wings? Why am I saying your commandment is a bird? Why am I calling the wings? I could say the arms of a person. Why am I calling it the wings of a bird? Or I could come up with some different metaphor. Why are we using the metaphor of a bird with wings, and the wings are love and fear? Well, just like the wings of a bird are not the bird itself, the body of the bird, as we see that the vitality of the bird is not dependent on the wings, meaning if the wings were removed, the bird could still live as many years as a bird lives. If it was in a safe place and didn't need to fly away from predators, it's okay. All of its vital organs are not in its wing. As we learn, nitlu akfe shever. If the wings are removed from a bird, the bird is still kosher. Now, it's actually interesting because in the Mishnah, which seemingly is the source for this law, it doesn't say if it was taken. It says if it was broken. That already becomes more problematic if the wings are broken. So there is a version that says if they were taken, if they are removed, according to the Taz, a major commentator there, bird's kosher. It's wingless, but everything else is intact. It's a kosher bird. You could eat it. It's not considered maimed. What do you mean it's not considered maimed? It's missing its wings. Yeah, for the bird, it's a bit of an impediment, but it doesn't damage any of the vital organs of the bird. The bird is still completely intact from that perspective. So what is the vital part of the bird? Well, the head and the body. The bird's wings are the appendages to the body. As the Rebbe says, what are wings? Wings serve the bird. Wings serve the head and the body because wings allow that body of the bird to soar. With wings, that bird can fly. And if there were no wings, the bird would fly. But flying is a very significant ability of a bird. But if you take away the ability to fly, it still can live as a bird. It still can live. So that's very precise. When you think about this, it just really heightens the precision of what the Rebbe is saying here. Your commandment is a commandment with or without love and fear. Obviously, we want love and fear. I hope some of you were focusing on love and fear as we've been pushing it for the past few weeks. And it's very significant. And 2 weeks ago, we learned something mind-boggling about love and fear. But with or without love and fear, your commandment's a commandment. It's completely intact. Check on your chart you need, you have. The concept that you serve God in this way, you did. But we want our commandment to soar. We want our commandment to ascend. Oh, okay. So for that, you need wings. For that, you need love and fear. But without love and fear, your commandment's a commandment, and nothing in the body of the commandment is missing if you don't have this very vital thing called love and fear. Meaning, of course, if you cared about the bird, you would want the wings to be intact. Of course, the wings are, in a sense, vital to the functionality of the bird, but it's not vital to its life. That's exactly like love and fear. Of course we want love and fear. Of course it completely transforms our commandment. Of course it's significant for the functionality of our commandment, for its ability to change worlds, cosmic world, my world, all the spiritual worlds, God's world. But without it, and it's still a commandment, cannot take that away. Kaf derech mashal, and so too in this metaphorically, HaTorah mitzvahs hen ikar yichud ha'olam. The Torah that you're studying, that's what we're doing right now. The commandment you're performing, that's what's creating the fusion with God. From this perspective that we've been discussing for these past few weeks, our commandments, our service of God causes unifications, divine unifications, cosmic unifications. Well, what's making that happen? The love, the fear? No, the commandment itself. The love and fear is facilitating that should happen. But what it's facilitating is the commandment, the action of service. That's where the unification occurs. The commandment is God's will. The Torah study is God's will. If you remember through this little piece of God's will, ascending, it elicits God's will, the will of God to emerge. And then there's that fusion between the will of God and my service, which is an expression of the will of God. And when the will of God is expressed, all the other attributes blend and merge and are nullified, and all the sweetnesses overcome all the other stuff. But all that's happening because a piece of God's will is eliciting the will of God. What's that piece of God's will? The commandment I did, the Torah I studied. So what do I need these wings for? To give it the strength to fly, to give it the strength to be in the space where it can elicit the will of God. But what's eliciting the will of God isn't the love and fear. It's the commandment. So that's where the unification is happening. That's what's actually creating this enormous power that we've been discussing for all these weeks. I'm sorry, I lost my place. I'm going to go back because I don't remember exactly where I got to. The Kaf derech mashal Torah mitzvos had ikar yichud elyon al tegila v'ratzon ha'elyon hamiskala ayidehen. And so too, that this is what I did read. The Torah and the commandments are the primary unification of God through the revelation of the supernal will that's revealed through them. So what's the function of the love and fear? Why do I need all this love and fear I keep talking about? Because they elevate that piece of divine will that I formed by my action, my Torah mitzvahs, limakom, to the place, she'isgala bo haratzon, that there the will of God can be revealed, or Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the infinity of God, His ultimate will, not a reflection, not a ray, not a glow, the actual will of God itself. And this unification is taking place not on planet Earth, but on some spiritual reality, as we've discussed. And now we have our third side note to focus on this point. Where is it taking place? So in the body of the text, the Alter Rebbe just told us where. 2 of the 4 spiritual worlds. We have the second spiritual world of Bria, creation, as we know and as we've discussed, the world where God's intellect shines. We have the third spiritual world, the world of formation, Yitzira, where God's emotions shine. But the Rebbe is going to say in the side note, this unification can also take place in the 4th spiritual world, the lowest. Well, of course, we'd like higher, but sometimes you don't get higher. But even on this 4th spiritual world, the world of Asiya, the world of action, is also possible here for a unification to take place. So anyone have any questions before we go for the side note?
Sorry about this question.
No, absolutely.
Well, yeah, that's kind of gross, but is it really like literally if you would clip off a bird's wings, like literally could it live? Like if you cut off a person's arm, like they probably couldn't live. Like, is that literal, or is this like
Literally, we're saying
this
yes, it could. Now,
idea
I
of a,
understand it would have to be cut off in a way that it's not damaging part of the body of the bird. And I don't know why any of us would dissect it, but of course there is the concept of clipping the wings of a bird. You know, they
like
actually do that. So
clipping?
birds sort of fly away. Not that I'm
I
an
don't know if
expert
it's
on this,
clip
but
off
there
the whole
definitely is
wing.
that idea on some level. So obviously it can't, it's not gonna be done barbarically. You're not like going to a bird and going like that, but in some fashion, yes. Our sages say it, and yes, they actually do something like that. But I don't know any more than to know that I've definitely heard of the concept of clipping birds' wings. And Goldie is helping us. It goes to technically live, but it wouldn't be able to get right. But I'm saying, I think if for some reason the bird is meant to be, like, in other words, it's domesticated, so to speak, it's not a wild bird, I definitely heard of the concept of clipping the wings in a cage. Okay, it doesn't sound like a great life. But for some, but I'm, again, the law is saying it's kosher. And if it had, as we know the law, more we think of it in terms of animals, but if a creature had okay, so that's what it means was clipping the wings. If a creature had a defect that would for sure cause its death, it's no longer kosher, right? That's the whole idea of kalat, kosher, and meat. That if there would be the potential there that it can't live in a period of 12 months, we know it's going to die, then it's not kosher anymore. So the fact that the Mishnah is saying it's kosher means it could, though, as Goldie's saying, practically speaking, unless you had somebody taking care of this, and then, you know, why would they do this? But if there was a reason in the world of theory, obviously we sometimes go into the world of theory to understand practical things. In the world of theory, yes, it works. And in the world of spirit, of course, it works. And someone else sent me a chat that I missed. Just one second. Yes, so someone asked me exactly what we're going to discuss now, which is why it's sometimes go to the second world and sometimes the third. And as we're going to say in the note, and sometimes the fourth. That is exactly a great on-target question, because it's exactly what we're going to read inside. Before that, anyone else has something they wanted to ask? Yeah. Goldie's in the middle of writing this. So Goldie's saying, so you're saying then the wings are very connected to the body, as the body is directing and causing those wings to work 100%. Well, that tremendously relates to the muscle, meaning that muscle, that metaphor is relating to what we're saying and why we're discussing the bird and the wings, because of course, the love and fear we're feeling is not surgically attached to the commandment we're doing. It's very, very interwoven with the commandment. But the point is not if you had love and fear and you want to surgically disconnect it from your commandment, but rather let's envision two states of being. A commandment done without love and fear. Can we imagine that? Sure, we do it all the time. And a commandment done with love and fear. Now, though that love and fear, how do we view it? We're viewing it as wings. We're not viewing it as essential to the body, because if it was essential to the body, then all of those love and fearless commandments would have this essence flaw. Wouldn't be real commandments. No checks in our chart. We didn't really do it. The body's flawed. It's missing an essential component. So the Alter is saying, no, that's not true. It's wings. The bird can live, if you're feeding it, without the wings. The commandment's a commandment, even if you spaced out on your feeling for God. Of course, we very often space out on our feeling for God. And I have to say personally, because listen, I teach this, I got to take it for real, right? I don't want to be a total hypocrite here. So I have been trying, especially over the past 3 weeks when we are so intently focusing on this topic, I have been trying. Do I remember every time I serve God? No, but it comes up at least once a day. I mean, all the myriad of commandments we do all day long of like really focusing on love and fear. Usually I catch myself in the middle of doing something. And of course, it's interwoven with what I'm doing. Of course, it's very feeling tone of what I'm doing. But the point is, if I didn't have that love and fear, my commandment's still intact. That's the point the Rebbe is saying. Is it under our control? I don't know if that was a question, but I'm going to view it as a question because I see a question mark there. Is it under our control could mean, I'm giving my commentary on what I just read, is under our control. Do we have the ability to like, all right, love, all right, fear, let's do it? Yes, we do. Now, obviously, how we do it now, I sure hope I'm not the only one that's been working on this, and I'm sure I'm not, so we can chime in other voices. But I'll just talk about my own personal experience because I'm the voice talking right now. We all love God and we all fear God. And as the Alter Rebbe says very simply, if you didn't, why would you be serving him? Why? Now, you know, we're not children that we have our parents or our teachers over our head pointing their finger in the prayer book, making sure we say those words, making sure nobody's giving us a clap or a piece of chocolate if we make a blessing. Nobody's reminding us to. Like, why do we do any of the things we do all day long? Because of a real, sincere love and fear of God. A love that therefore I have a desire to connect with God and to give to God. If you love someone, you want to be with them. If you love someone, you want to give to them. So I love God. Therefore, I want to give to him. This is how I can. Therefore, I want to connect to him. I want to be one with him. This is how I can. So we all have that feeling very often, very, very deep. And we all have fear. Fear is the most foundational feeling for God. It actually comes before love. It's much easier to access. You could have the most simple fear, which is this sense of, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to lose something. I don't want to get in trouble. Or as we've discussed in the past weeks, you can have more and more refined fears, a sense of embarrassment, of hurting God, of not wanting to pain God, of not wanting to take God's energy and put it in the wrong places. Levels and levels and levels of why you would have a fear and awe, a nullification to God. So we all have that, because if we didn't have that, we would not be doing what we're doing. But that doesn't mean that at the moment when you're saying a prayer or a blessing or putting a coin in the charity box or doing any of the things we do all day long, you're feeling any of that. But it's very deep inside. So what you need to do is stop and sort of demand it from yourself. Pull it out. Focus on it. I mean, again, I don't know if it's the best technique, but what I do when I remember is say, I really do love you, because that's why I'm doing this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. I really do fear you, and that's why I'm doing this. Now, again, some things you do, you more strongly naturally feel the love, and some things you do, you more naturally feel the fear. But in both of them, I say, no. Even though love is dominant, I've got fear here. Even though fear is dominant, I've got love here. And I just remind myself of it till something emerges. Is it the totality of my love and fear? No, but it's something. So it's some level of wing. And as we're going to read in the note, depending on how strong it is and depending where it's coming from, determines what world it goes to. All right. So let's look at that side note. So we're on page 110. We're on the third of these notes. Oh, afilu ba'asiya. Now, in the body of the text, the Alter Rebbe said, you've got two options for where this unification is happening. It's happening in the spiritual world of Bria, creation, the second spiritual world, or it's happening in the spiritual world of Yetzirah, formation, the third spiritual world. And in the note, this same author, meaning it's the same voice of the Alter Rebbe, is saying, I haven't really been saying this in the body of the text, but I'm going to give you another option, maybe for people like me that aren't going to even make it up to the third world. It also can happen in the fourth world, the lowest, which means the easiest one to access, the world of Asiya, of action. Besser Spheros Kedusha, in the 10 holy attributes of that world, Makom Mitzvos Maisios. Well, what's going to get there? Well, things that don't feel as spiritual and therefore aren't ascending to a higher, more spiritual world. If you remember, and this would be an amazing star student if you did, because we discussed this 2 weeks ago, but the idea of love and fear is to spiritualize our commandment. You're eating a food, you're making a blessing. It doesn't feel very spiritual to you, though it is. It's words. It's words within our physical world. You're giving opportunity. It's money you're handing from one hand to another. So the spirituality of that act is submerged in the physicality of it. When you love and fear are more overtly spiritual entities. So the love and fear that's connecting to whatever this more physical act seems to be is like stripping it away and revealing what's really going on. When I love and fear and then do a kindness for someone else, it's expressing that this isn't just a human act of one nice person to another. No, the core motivation has to do with God. The core motivation is love and fear of God. This is a spiritual act. So when I have that love and fear, it's stripping away this veneer of physical, mundane. It's expressing its true spiritual energy, and that's what gives it the strength to ascend. So how high does it go? Well, it depends on how much spirituality is in your love and fear. So we have, as we've discussed in the past, two very broad categories for love and fear. The higher one is love and fear created by mind, because there's a tremendous value to using your mind to create something. That's like really with your own sweat and toil. And God really appreciates that. Like, bottom line, the harder something is for you, the more God appreciates it. You mean if it's easy for me, it's not as valued? Yes, but we appreciate easy, so don't worry. But the harder it is, the more it's valued. So when you really use your mind and create an emotional connection to God, wow, that's powerful enough to go very high, because a lot of your sweat and effort is in it, and to go to the world of Bria, the second world, because that's the world of intellect, of God's intellect. And since you are using your intellect to create this emotion, it's connecting to God's intellect, the world of God's intellect, world number 2, Bria, the world of creation. But let's do that. God says, I appreciate it so much, don't worry. You uncovered the natural love and fear you have because you're a Jew and you naturally love God and you naturally fear God. So how do we look at that as emotion? It wasn't created by intellect, even though you needed intellect to uncover it. But in essence, it's emotion. So it doesn't have as much strength as the first one because it's not as much a product of your effort. It's more easy and more natural. We have it and we uncover what we naturally have. And it's going to the world of emotion because it's pure emotion. Well, what's the world of emotion? The third world, the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation. So it works on both levels. It's emotional, go to the world of emotion, and it's less strong because you put less effort. So go to the third world, the world of emotion. Now the Rebbe is saying, guess what, guys? Maybe your love and fear aren't even strong enough to get to world 3, but maybe they could get to world 4. Because world 4 isn't even the world of emotion. It's like the world of action. That's actually its name, Asiya, which means action. So the action of the commandments, just with a little bit, maybe like what I do, just remembering, focusing yourself on the love and fear you know you have somewhere very deep inside, and that pulling it out a bit. Okay, so it's not real intense emotion. If it was, it would go higher, but it's going somewhere. It's going to the world of action. So therefore, when you do commandments that are action-oriented, but you're remembering and focusing on the love and fear you have, hey, it could go to the world of action. You could say, well, what do you mean go? It's here. This is the world of Asiya. No, this is the physical manifestation of the fourth world, the spiritual world of Asiya, of action. But when we're saying go to, we actually mean ascending somewhere. So it's going to the spiritual dimension. Now, again, whenever we say go to, as we've said before, and if this sentence is too mind-bending, ignore it, but we're not going anywhere. There is no space besides our physical reality. Space and time are the coordinates of physicality. So it's not a spiritual ladder actually higher than our Milky Way galaxy. We're going to ascend to some spiritual reality called Asiya, and then ascend higher to a spiritual reality called Yetzirah. But we're human beings living in physical worlds. So it makes it a lot easier in our brains to think of going up that ladder. But in spirituality, we're going up that ladder. So we are ascending to the spiritual dimension of Asiya, of the fourth world, the world of action, of which we are the physical component, by doing an action, but there is some little wing there. There is an awareness, there is a focus, there is a memory. You are reminding yourself, I do feel love and fear. I know I do, because if I didn't, why would I be doing this? That's very action, love and fear, but it's still enough to move it somewhat. Additionally, v'chein mikra. Now the Rebbe opens up a new dimension, and that's really the point that we're going to develop in this note. Also, mikra. What is mikra? Mikra means the words of scripture, the word of the 24 volumes of Tanakh, of the written Torah. So Torah, as we're going to look at it now in this note, is in very broad strokes thought of as the written Torah, the 24 books of the written Torah, of the scriptures, the 24 books of Tanakh. That's called Mikra. And then there's Mishnah. Mishnah is the first codification of the oral Torah. When God, 3,300 plus years ago, gave us the Torah, he gave us everything. But for thousands of years, the oral Torah was kept oral. People obviously writing some notes to themselves, but not in any systematic codified way. At a certain point after the destruction of the Second Temple, the leader of the Jews at that time, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Judah the Prince, said, this doesn't work anymore. If we don't write it down, it's going to be lost. But we really don't want to write it down, but otherwise it'll be lost. So let's compromise. So about 1900, some by now more than 1900 plus years ago, it was written down in the most abridged fashion possible, like cliff notes, just enough to jog our memory of lots and lots and lots of things we're not reading. And that worked for a few hundred years, and then it didn't work anymore because people didn't know what they were supposed to remember when they learned it. So the sages said, we got to write more down. And that's the Gemara, explaining, elucidating, questioning, debating, discussing the Mishnah. And the combination of Mishnah and Gemara is what we call Talmud. So there's that body of knowledge of Mikra, 24 books of the written Torah. There's Mishnah, the first codification of law, the core crux of oral Torah. And then there's Gemara, Talmud, elucidating, explaining, analyzing all that tremendous brain work of Talmud. And then there's another whole dimension of Torah called Kabbalah, the esoteric dimension, the mystical dimension. So the Rebbe says, when you are reading Mikra, the word Mikra, if you know Hebrew, the etymology is Kriya, reading. Why do we call Mikra Kriya, reading? Because it's actually the only part of Torah that there's a commandment merely to read the words. Meaning, let's practically, for people out there that know what I mean to say their chitas. Chitas is a portion of Chumash, the daily portion of Chumash with Rashi, a portion of Tanya as it's divided throughout the year, and a portion of Psalms, of Tehillim. So a person might just read without knowing what they're saying, Tanya, or for that matter, Chumash and Rashi. Well, the only thing you really get credit for from a perspective of the commandment is when you're reading those words of Chumash. Because if you read words of Rashi and have no clue what you're saying, and if you read words of Tanya and have no clue what you're saying, you didn't do anything. Now, you still did a wonderful thing called saying your chitas on some level and definitely continue from that reason, for the reason of connecting to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and his instruction and his kashrus and connection. That's very significant. But from a legal perspective, we have two commandments in terms of Torah: the study and understanding of Torah and the reading of Torah. The only part of Torah that we get a commandment for literally reading the words is called Mikra, is the 24 books of Tanakh, which does include, by the way, Tehillim, Psalms. It's a prayer and it's also Torah. Very, very powerful duality there. But for all those 24 books, I don't have to understand a word I'm saying. I read it. Am I fulfilling the commandment of learning Torah? No. no learning Torah happened, no study of Torah happened, no understanding of Torah happened, but I'm fulfilling the commandment of reading it. It's interesting because our sages say the movement of the lips is a minor action. So when you read those words, you're just moving your lips. Obviously, if you eyeball it, it's not called reading from a Torah legal perspective. Not when you pray, and actually not when you study. Anything that you study, you have to move your lips, unless you're like in this type of situation, which is a class. But if you're studying yourself, you always must move your lips, and ideally a voice should come out. And when you're praying, you always must move your lips, and a voice should come out. So Mikra Kriya, that's an action. It's going to the world of Asiya, of action, because there's an action in speech. There's an action in moving the lips. If I want to get a little deeper here, we discussed a long time ago that each of these four worlds relate to a different, what Kabbalistically is called partsuf. Partsuf means, it's a Kabbalistic word, that means the face of God, the primary energy of that world. Every one of these four worlds has all 10 of God's divine attributes, but in each world, something else is dominant. So in the highest world, in the world of Atzilus, of being, what's dominant is Chachma, the first of the 10 divine attributes, which just means nullification to God. That's why it's a completely spiritual reality. No angels are found there. No chambers are found there. Only the highest souls are found there. It's a world of being, a world of Chachma, of complete nullification to God. The next world, the world of Bria, which I said is a world of God's intellect, is because the parts of the face is God's intellectual dimensions, Bina and Das, the next two of the divine attributes. And that's why it's the world of God's intellect. The third world is the world of Yetzirah. We said it's the world of emotion because the parts of the face, the dominant energy, is God's 6 emotional attributes. And now we come to the final world, the world of Asiya. We've got one attribute left, the 10th attribute, the attribute of Malchus, God's sovereignty. Malchus is the most fascinating attribute there is, but I don't think we have time to really go into it so much now. But I just want to bring up one dimension. So Malchus is the bottom of the barrel, and it's called sovereignty, which is sort of interesting because you wouldn't think sovereignty would be number 10 on the list. But the ends are linked. So the highest, which is called Kesser, which is the crown, which is above all, and the lowest, which is sovereignty, really are like joined and really express each other. And its sovereignty, it's the ultimate power, it's creation. God's creation is embedded in Malchus, which is why the Malchus, the sovereignty of one world, the lowest dimension of a world, gives birth to the next world. So sovereignty is the ultimate power, it's the power of creation. And it's God's speech, because God creates through his speech. As it says, sages basis on a verse, Devar Melech Shilton, a king rules with his speech. Meaning, if he wants himself a coffee, he doesn't go to the stove and order the coffee percolator. He says, I want a coffee. Boom. His speech creates. God's speech is his tool of creation. And of course, as we know, as our sages say, with 10 divine utterances, Basar Mamaros Nivra Ha'olam, God spoke and all came into being. And God keeps speaking because all still exists. So for 5,783 years, God's still talking the world, all of the worlds into being. So how is God creating? With his hands? No. With his thoughts? No. With his speech. So the fourth world, which is the world of Asiya, of action, is the world that the parts of the dominancy is sovereignty, is Malchus, is the speech of God. Because the speech of God is God's action. And therefore, it's the world of Mikra, the world where speaking counts. Because specifically through Mikra, through the 24 books of Tanakh, of scriptures, literally speaking them, and I don't understand a word I'm saying, but literally speaking them counts. I'm doing a very, very special commandment of speaking words of Torah. But again, if I speak words of Talmud, if I speak words of Hasidic thought, I didn't perform the commandment. Only if I speak words of Mikra, of the written Torah. I just put a lot out there. Does anyone have any questions on it?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
So when we say words of Tanya or anything in Chassidus, that does not count as Mikra?
100% not. It's not Mikra. The Tanya is Chassidus. Chassidus is Torah Sheba'al Peh. Mikra is only Tanakh. So there's no concept of reading words of Tanya without understanding it to fulfill a mitzvah. Meaning you don't have the mitzvah of reading Torah, because that's only for Mikra. And you don't have the mitzvah of understanding Torah, because you don't understand what you're saying. So is there a virtue in it? Of course there's a virtue in it. There's a virtue in connecting to the Rebbe and doing what the Rebbe wants and saying your chaitas. But of course the Rebbe would really want you to understand it. So that's why we have all these wonderful, ways to do that nowadays. But there's a value in it. There's a spiritual value in it, but it's not the mitzvah of reading Torah, and it's not the mitzvah of understanding Torah. But if one is learning Tanya, and you're understanding, I mean, like right now we are learning, right? We're learning, we're understanding, we're all getting it. Everyone's claiming they're getting it. No one's asking questions. Let's hope that means that. Are we fulfilling a mitzvah? Of course. We're fulfilling the mitzvah of learning Torah. We're fulfilling the mitzvah of understanding Torah. But we're not, even me who's reading the text at some intermittent points here, we're not fulfilling the mitzvah of reading Torah, because that could only be fulfilled with Mikra. But we are fulfilling the very important commandment of learning, of studying, of understanding Torah. When we say the sages, the men, have a constant obligation to learn Torah, we don't mean to read it. We mean to learn it, to understand it. Rachel?
Cyril, does it matter the language you read the Torah in?
That's an excellent question. You're saying to fulfill the mitzvah of reading Torah?
Yeah.
Yeah. It should be basically in Lashon HaKodesh or possibly in Greek. But yeah, those are your two options.
Oh yeah, okay.
So there's an interesting story with the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he was once with his wife, with the Rebbetzin, and there was someone else in the room, a sort of wild chassid, not going to say his name, maybe a little rude, because obviously if you see the Rebbe and Rebbetzin there and they might want to be talking privately, you should leave the room, but he didn't. And the Rebbetzin wanted to say something to the Rebbe, so she was obviously trying to figure out what language to use, because she knew this chassid obviously understands English, obviously understands Hebrew, obviously understands Yiddish, and he was from Russia, so he also understood Russian. So there went those 4 languages. So she started speaking in French. And the Rebbe said to her in Yiddish, he understands. So obviously he also understood French. So there went that. So then the Rebbetzin started speaking in another language. And the man was like, he's trying to figure it out. I mean, as I said, not exactly appropriate, but he's trying to catch what language it is. He knows a lot of languages, as we said, English, Hebrew, Yiddish, Russian, French, no problem. He didn't know what the language was, and he didn't understand the conversation, which of course was the point. And afterwards he asked, they were talking in Latin. Any other questions? Okay, so what we discussed now, getting back to the note, is we thought until now.
I have a question.
Sure, Esther, how are you?
Oh, Baruch Hashem, and how are you?
Good, Baruch Hashem.
If somebody learns Torah but they don't really understand it, what does that count for?
100%.
If they
Absolutely.
Torah.
That is reading Torah. They're literally laning the Torah. That's exactly the mitzvah of reading Torah. Absolutely.
And let's say they don't understand it. I mean, they have an idea, but they don't really.
That's fine. They're definitely fulfilling the mitzvah of reading words of Torah. 100%.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. So until we had this note, we thought, I have to have this real intense emotion strong enough to get at least to the 3rd spiritual world, which is a world of emotion. So I need a lot of emotion, but I'm not pulling out a lot of emotion. I was saying, don't worry, Daganish. You can at least pull out an action version of emotion, focus, know you have it, demand from yourself something. Are those wings going to flutter very strongly? No, but it'll be enough to get to the world of Asiya, which still is a spiritual reality. And again, as we've learned, once you get to any spiritual reality, you're good, because the commandment is going to fuse with the core godliness, within which is the deeper core godliness, within which is the deeper core godliness, until we get to the infinity of God himself, until we get to the divine supernal will, and then everything we've learned about happens. So this is really very, very validating for those of us that have been trying to pull out love and fear and maybe feeling it's not so emotional love and emotional fear. It's getting to the world of Asiya, we're good. It's amazing. And that we just explained is the world of Mikra, the world of reading, because Asiya is action without that much emotion, without that much depth, without that much intellect, but I could read the words. That's the world of Mikra. It's great things are happening. Aval, but we can go higher. The Mishnah, Miskala Hayichad V'Orin Sof Baruch Hu B'Yetzira. U'B'Talmud B'Briya. What the Rebbe is now telling us is actually, just as I now showed you how Mikra, Tanakh, the scriptures, for many reasons relates to this lowest of the four worlds, the world of Asiya, every world has a Torah. Every world has a dimension of Torah that relates to it. Kabbalah, Atzilus. As we said, Kabbalah is this mystical God awareness. That's Atzilus. As we said, the highest world, the world of Chachma, the world of unification, the world where all you feel is God. The next world, Bria, intellect. That's the world of Talmud, because Talmud is the intellect of Torah, all the analysis and discussion and debate and argumentation. The third world, the world of Yetzira, of emotion, that's Mishnah. Well, why is that Mishnah? Well, we mentioned this before. Mishnah means sort of the bottom line law. And the bottom line law is God's emotions. Now, you might not think that law is very emotional, but God's law to God is very emotional, because this is what he wants. This is what he loves. And this is what he doesn't want. This is what, so to speak, he hates. So from his end, the most emotional expression of himself is revealed to us in law. So when we're studying law, which is very significant, and many places in Hasidic thought, it focuses on the enormity of studying law, we're really very deeply connecting to his feelings and really to his will. This is what I want. This is what I love. This is what I want you not to do. This is what I despise. I love it. I hate it. That's emotion. So Mishnah, the very, very skeletal codification of law without really explaining the whys, we leave that for Talmud, for Gemara. That's the world of emotion, Yetzirah. And as we said, Mikra, the Tanakh, literally the words of scripture, that's the world of action, not intellect, not emotion, just the bottom line action, the verses themselves. So therefore, when you study Kabbalah, there's a direct connection to Atzilus, the highest world. When you study Talmud, there's a connection to the second world, Bria. When you study Mishnah, there's a connection to the third world, Yetzirah. And when you study the verses, there's a connection to the fourth world, Asiya. But that raises a question, which the Rebbe is now going to deal with for the remainder of this note. And the question is very simple. The question is, wait a minute. And or more politely, I don't understand. Based on this logic that we just said so clearly, Mikra is in the lowest world, then Mishnah, then Talmud, then Kabbalah. Wait a minute. Isn't Mikra the holiest thing we have? Mikra is not. It's the entire, it's the 24 books. Every word is the ultimate of godly. I mean, go from the 24 to the 5 books of Torah. Every word there is so precious. And you're saying that's relegated to world number 4? And in essence, Gemara is an elucidation on Mishnah. So Gemara is in a higher world than Mishnah. And Kabbalah, it's esoteric, but it's not the law itself. That's in the highest world. What is going on? So there is that's a good question. Let me clarify for you. Dehainu means to say, Shebelimud Mikra, when there's the study of Mikra, Mispashet hayichud v'orein sof baruch hu. The fusion, the unification with God extends me'atzilus, from the highest realm of our solar system of worlds, from that world number one of being, ad ha'asiyah, all the way down through all the four worlds until the fourth asiyah, action. Ube Mishnah. And if one is studying the first written expression of the oral law, Mishnah, the crux of the law itself, ad hayitzira levada. Well, it also starts off in Atzilus, but it can only get till Yitzira. Ube Talmud ad abriya levada. And if it's Talmud, well, it can't even get that low. It can only get to Bria. Kikulan ba'atzilus, because they all start out in the world of oneness, of unification, of Atzilus. About Kabbalah, but if we're talking about Kabbalah, the esoteric dimension, it can't even leave Atzilus to go to any of the lower worlds. As is explained in that Kabbalistic work of the Eitz Chaim, of the Chaim Vital, who's writing down the teachings of the Arizal HaKadosh. So what did the Rebbe just turn everything around? The Rebbe said, wait a minute. Nothing can be holier than Mikra. Why is it in world 4? And the Mishnah in world 3? Because really, they're all starting off on the top. It's Torah. All of Torah is higher than any of this. Torah is the core energy of creation. Torah and God are absolutely one. God, his supernal will, his infinity, Torah, that's all one package deal. Torah creates everything. Torah created Atzilus and Bria and Yitzira and Asi and this physical reality. So when we're learning Torah, it doesn't start off in the world of Asiya. Torah is higher than all of this. So when a Jew studies Torah, any Torah, the unification is occurring in the world of Atzilus, in the highest world in our spectrum of worlds. But we don't want it to stay there. The goal would be, how far can it come down? So when it's written in Kabbalistic works, that Mikra, that the written Torah, the 24 books, are in the fourth world, because that's the world of Mikra, the world of Asiya, the world of action, the lowest world, it's because the 24 written works of Torah, the Torah Shebichsav, the written Torah, is so powerful, it can go through all the worlds. Its light can shine in Atzilus and in Bria and in Yetzirah and even in Asiya. Mishnah is not as powerful, but it's the crux of the oral Torah. So we could get down to the third world of Yetzirah, meaning all three. Talmud gets to 2, and Kabbalah stays in the world of Atzilus. So it's just fascinating how everything works perfectly. On one level, well, Mikra goes to the fourth world because it's the most powerful. On the other level, Mikra goes to the fourth world because that's the world of Asiya, and that's action, and it's Mikra, and it's Kriya, and it all works together. Mishnah is powerful enough to go through 3 worlds, and Mishnah goes to Yitzira because it's emotion, and this is God's emotion. Talmud can get to 2 worlds, and it's coming to a little bit of Bria because it's intellect, and this is God's intellect. And Kabbalah can't leave the haloed ground of Atzilus, which makes sense because Atzilus is God's being, Chachma, complete nullification, and that's what Kabbalah is. So it all absolutely works on levels we understand, and of course, on many, many levels that we are completely clueless of. Any questions on any of that?
Where's Chassidus in this?
Excellent question, Esther. So until like, I don't remember the year, but somewhere in, I don't know, I remember it was the late 60s or early 70s, I would have like smiled and said, I guess somewhere like Kabbalah, isn't Chassidus like Kabbalah? But since Baruch Hashem, it's been many years since, we know that no, Chassidus is not layman's version of Kabbalah, as some people still, of course, erroneously think. Chassidus is not a branch of Kabbalah, it's not a dimension of Kabbalah. the Rebbe explains in a very foundational work. It's actually not a mimer. You think it's a mimer, but it's actually not. It was a sicha. It was said on Yud Kislev. Well, Yud Kislev is the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. So it makes sense on the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus to explain what Chassidus is. It was translated into English years ago, one of probably the first things translated into Chassidus, translated into English. It's called in English On the Essence of Chassidus. And it's an amazing talk, which we have a tape of. It was a weekday for Brainian. And when you listen to the tape, you're like, they really understood all of this as the Rebbe was saying? That's pretty intense. But we can, of course, study it many times. And the Rebbe there explains that Hasidus is a completely separate, independent level of Torah beyond any of the other four. The Rebbe explains that there are 5 levels of Torah, not 4. Traditionally, it was Pshat, Remez, Drush, Soid. The Rebbe says it's Pshat, Remez, Drush, Soid, and Hasidus. All 5 levels of Torah originate in the same place, in God's will and wisdom, beyond creation, one with God, but they all descend. And generally, as the Torah descends, it gets put within a box, the box of its own parameters. And that box obscures the God energy within it. It's still totally there, but it's hard for us to see it. It's hard for us to access it. Hasidus doesn't have any boxes. Since Hasidus does not have any boxes, even as it enters this world and our brain cells, the God energy is revealed. And that's why when we study Hasidus, we can so strongly feel God. And when Hasidus is elucidating any of the other levels of Torah, as Hasidus does all the time, it can pull out and reveal the God energy in those levels, because it's all there. But we need something out of the box to pull out what's in the box. That's a very brief explanation of a very amazing, amazing talk of the Rebbe. And again, if one wanted to learn it in English, I'm sure they'll come up with something more, everything becomes better done, nicer done, or at least fancier done. But I know what it was called originally was On the Essence of Hasidus. I will say it one more time. Someone just asked me to repeat it. But I'm giving a one-liner on a work of, I don't remember, 20 ICS, I think. 20 sections of a very, very amazing talk of the Rebbe, one of the most foundational talks of the Rebbe. So the Rebbe, this is on the 19th of Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, and the Rebbe is saying, what is the function of Hasidus? What is Hasidus? And the Rebbe gives 4 classical answers. Those 4 answers are not true. They're all from earlier Rebbeim, so they're all absolutely true. They're all things Torah of Hasidus says what Hasidus is. But the Rebbe says, none of these are the core. They're all true. Of course, they're all true. They're all from Rebbeim, but none of these are the core. None of this is exactly telling us what is Hasidus. And then the Rebbe develops at length what is Hasidus, and the Rebbe explains that Hasidus is the expression of God's will and wisdom that is not hampered by the boxes that obscure all the rest of Torah. The only thing true in this world is Torah. For example, as the Rebbe explains, every science in this world has to have some Torah in it, because that's its piece of truth. If it didn't have that piece of truth, it wouldn't be. Like every lie has a bit of truth in it. So every wisdom in the world has Torah in it. And I'm sure we've all found it. Like sometimes like you learn something, you're like, oh my gosh, that's just like, well, of course. There's actually a incident that happened with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was traveling by train. Now in our days, people are into things much more pragmatic. But in those days, the really cool thing that people were debating and fervent about and passionate about was political structures. So this was a discussion among probably a bunch of Jews on the train, and they're all passionately arguing, is it Bundism or communism or socialism or democracy? Like, what's the real ultimate political structure for mankind? And the Rebbe, the priest of the Rebbe was on the train. So they turned to him as like, this world leader. And they each tried to prove that their political system was true because they could find Torah in it. They could find something in it that had to do with Torah. And the Rebbe responded that, of course, everything in this world that exists, every science, every body of knowledge has Torah in it, which doesn't mean the rest of it. It's not putting a hechsher a stamp of approval on the rest of it. If it didn't have it, it wouldn't exist. I remember once studying communism to help my daughter write a paper for school. And I was awed by what Mashiach parallelisms you see in there. But of course, that's just a piece. And then there's everything else. So that's all of Torah. But all of Torah, as it comes into this world, it's obscured the God energy. But Hasidus just goes straight to the core. And that's why when you learn Hasidus, it ignites your soul and you feel God. So the Rebbe explains this, and then the Rebbe gives an example. As the ultimate teacher, he's giving you an example to make sense, because otherwise it's very abstract and you don't really relate to it. And the Rebbe takes Moed Ani, and the Rebbe explains why he picked Moed Ani. He gives various reasons why Moed Ani is chosen. We actually know from other sources that Moed Ani is the Rebbe's favorite prayer. So if you want to focus on one prayer, Moed Ani is an excellent one to choose. As the Rebbe says, Moed Ani means, thank you, God, for giving me another chance. Thank you, God, for trusting me and giving me another day of life. So the Rebbe first takes Moed Ani and explains it on the 4 levels of Pshat, Remez, Drush, Shleim. Then the Rebbe explains it on Hasidus. And then the Rebbe goes back and explains the Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Side of Moed Ani as it's illuminated by Hasidus, showing the God energy in Pshat and Remez and Drush and Side. But you only would see that God energy with Hasidus. I'm just going to give you the Hasidus on it. I'm not going to give any more, because like that could be another great class. And again, this is available in English, and it's definitely worth studying. What is the Hasidus Moed Ani? So Hasidus Moed Ani is actually written in the Hayom Yom. Everything's very precise in the Hayom Yom. If you want to know the essence of the day, study the Hayom Yom. So on the first 24 hours of the Rebbe's leadership, which is the 11th of Shvat, this is the Hayom Yom of the 11th of Shvat. This is the core of the Rebbe's leadership. All of the impurities of the world cannot defile the Moed Ani of a Jew. When you say Moed Ani, your hands are impure. You didn't wash Nagel yet. You've got impurity. You're defiled. But you can still say Moed Ani. That's what Hasidus says about Moed Ani. Meaning, Hasidus is saying, Moed Ani is pulling out the God energy of a Jew, and because every Jew has that God energy, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done wrong, you're a Jew. I don't care how impure your hands are. You can also say Moed Ani. To be able to look at a Jew and see that, you need Hasidus. I'll give you one more, because I see there are questions. I'll just give you one more, and then I'm going to stop this for everybody that's wondering why we're doing this. The Pshat, and this is just be very brief, this is this first one. The Pshat of Moed Ani means, thank you, God, for giving me life. That's exactly what it means. Thank you, God, for giving me life. The Hasidus on that Pshat says, thank you, God, for giving me Nishmasi, my life as a Jew. Because if it's not Jewish life, it's not life worth living. Now, is that what the Pshat means? It is what the Pshat means. But we need Hasidus to uncover for us that that's what the Pshat means. Why do I need Hasidus to uncover that for me? Because once there's a box, once there's a barrier, other things seem to exist besides God. There's a box called Pshat, the literal meaning. So there's something that exists besides God, Pshat. So when something else exists besides God, life is valuable. Obviously, the best is Jewish life, but life is still valuable. I mean, it's still the biggest gift you could want. Hasidus says, no. I have no boxes. The only thing that exists for me is God. If it's not Jewish life, it's not life. It's not worth living. Like the famous story in the Hayom Yom of a certain chassid of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi Leffler, that when the Alter Rebbe wanted to bless him with life, he said, but not peasant years, where your eyes don't see and your ears don't hear God. Otherwise, no thanks. I want real life. I want Jewish life, or I'm not interested. Someone gives you such a gift like life and you question it and you say, I want it like this and not like this. If it's not Jewish life, it's not life. We need Hasidus to show us that that is what the Pshat is saying. And we spent a long time on that. So sorry. Anyone have any other question on the Tanya?
Yes, I just had a question, which was, I don't know, maybe like a little branching off, but I'm something I really am wondering about lately, because, like if there's Chachma, amongst the Goyim, we need to believe it because there's some emes, in there from Torah. But like with especially nowadays, like the direction of like mindfulness and kind of like mixing into some like Eastern medicine type ideas, different things like that. Or it could be even in a different case of a different science or healthcare science, whatever it is. Because we can't sift out what's emes and what's sheker because it's mixed, right? So, but the Rebbe taught us that it's there, is teaching us that it's there. There is emes within there. But I guess my question is there room for figuring out your own connections, or can you never say, I know this is emes and in line with Torah, and it connects to, a certain aspect of, this aspect of this scientific thing connects to this aspect that we see in Chassidus. Like, do we have the ability to do that? Or is that something that, like, is that something we're supposed to do? Are we supposed to look for that? Or are we supposed to stay away? Like, no, we can't decipher what's emes and what's sheker because there could be a little bit mixed in that's not in line with us. I guess.
I totally hear the question. It's a very real question. I've heard that question, and I mean, you're saying it very eloquently. I've heard the question expressed much more simply, but yes, the answer, as the Rebbe says it, is we have to be very, very, very cautious. If there's we're going to use the word science loosely. I don't think you necessarily mean it's exactly science, but if there's a body of wisdom that creates tools and we can use those tools, that's fine. But the tools don't mean that the philosophy behind those tools are necessarily in line with Torah and with our spiritual alignment. So we definitely don't have the discrimination, the discernment, and as you're saying, the confusion could be in any wisdom in the world, you're going to find something that matches Torah, because if you didn't, it wouldn't exist. So everywhere you look, if you have the eyes to see and if you know it enough, you will find some Torah in it. You will. You have to, actually. But that doesn't say that the rest of it's kosher. So that's why, as a set of tools can be useful. Tools work. You can use tools. But as the philosophy, the hashkafa, so to speak, the mindfulness behind it, that might be very, very not in alignment with Torah. And therefore, no, we do not trust our own discernment there.